Picture this. A woman stands in front of her mirror, whispering affirmations with trembling lips. I am grateful. I am abundant. I am happy. Her smile doesn't reach her eyes, but she keeps repeating the words, as if saying them louder might make them true. Then she scrolls through social media, 1,000 perfect lives, 1,000 glowing faces, and feels the quiet shame of not being one of them. So she straightens her spine, wipes the tears, and posts her own smile. Good vibes only. And this, Jung would say, is not healing. It's worship, not of God, but of light. We live in an age that has made happiness holy. Everywhere you turn, there's a sermon. Think positive. Manifest abundance. Don't let negative people drain your energy. But Jung warned that every extreme, even light, creates its own shadow. The more you demand constant positivity, the more the psyche must repress what doesn't fit the script. Grief becomes guilt. Anger becomes shame. Fear becomes failure. And soon, your own humanity starts to feel like sin. Jung called this the persona, the social mask we wear to meet the expectations of others. In our time, that mask has evolved into something far more dangerous. The constant smile, the curated joy, the illusion of perpetual peace. It's not just a mask anymore. It's a lifestyle. You're told that your vibration determines your destiny, that your emotions attract your experiences. So you suppress the dark to protect your future. You don't cry when you're sad. You visualize. You don't rage when you're wronged. You journal it into gratitude. And slowly, the mask fuses to your face. You become the positive one, the one who uplifts, inspires, and never complains. But deep down, the light starts to burn. Because the soul can feel when it's being silenced. People don't chase positivity out of joy. They chase it out of fear. Fear of being judged. Fear of losing control. Fear of touching the dark that lives inside them. So they cling to affirmations like armor, believing that if they just stay high vibe, nothing bad will happen. But Jung saw through that illusion. He said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. The obsession with light isn't enlightenment. It's evasion. You're not escaping darkness. You're being ruled by it, because everything you refuse to face begins to control you. What starts as motivation turns into manipulation. You convince yourself that sadness is weakness, that pain is failure, that authenticity is low energy. So you begin to curate yourself, filtering your emotions like photos. You smile when you're breaking. You say, I'm fine, when your chest is on fire. You post inspiration while praying for relief. And at first, it works. People call you radiant, strong, evolved. But when the lights go out, when you're alone with your thoughts, you feel the hollowness. Because beneath that endless light, there's no soil left, only glare. Jung warned that to identify only with the good is to lose the soul. Light without shadow is blindness. The cult of positivity doesn't free you. It cages you in a smile you can't remove. Because the psyche doesn't want perfection. It wants truth, and truth includes the dark, the pain, the doubt, the grief. Jung would remind you, the self doesn't awaken through constant happiness. It awakens the moment you allow your sorrow to speak. On the surface, positivity seems like courage, like choosing light over darkness, faith over fear. But Jung would say otherwise. Most people who chase light aren't brave. They're terrified, because to feel is to risk collapse. And to collapse, in a world that worships composure, feels like death. The truth is, the modern obsession with positivity has very little to do with joy, and everything to do with fear. You don't smile because you're happy. You smile because you're scared. Scared that if you let sadness out, it will never stop. Scared that if you show anger, people will leave. Scared that if you admit to despair, it will swallow you whole. So you lock your emotions behind the mask of light, calling it strength when it's really suppression. Jung wrote, neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. In other words, the moment you refuse to feel your real pain, the psyche creates artificial suffering in its place. Anxiety, emptiness, numbness, endless striving for happiness that never lands. Because unexpressed pain doesn't disappear, it metastasizes. From childhood, you were taught that strong emotions are dangerous. Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Don't be angry. Be grateful for what you have. So you learned early, emotion equals chaos. Emotion equals rejection. And the child who once cried freely became the adult who apologizes for feeling at all. You learn to manage your moods the way you manage your social image. Neat, tidy, acceptable. But Jung knew what happens when the emotional life is repressed. It turns inward and devours the soul. He said that emotion is the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. Without it, the psyche starves. And so, the more you suppress, the more fragile you become. Because you're not controlling your emotions. You're being controlled by your fear of them. In spiritual circles, this fear dresses itself in new language. Stay high vibe. Avoid low-frequency people. Don't manifest negativity. But Jung would see this for what it is: metaphysical avoidance. The spiritual ego disguising fear as enlightenment. Because true evolution isn't the elimination of darkness. It's intimacy with it. The soul doesn't ascend by escaping shadow. It integrates it. When you call anger low vibration, you condemn your own boundaries. When you call grief negative energy, you exile your own humanity. And when you worship constant light, you forget that even the sun must set. The psyche doesn't want constant radiance. It wants rhythm. The natural cycle of creation and decay, joy and despair, rising and falling. Without darkness, there is no depth. When you avoid your emotions long enough, you stop recognizing them. You don't feel sad, you feel off. You don't feel angry, you feel unmotivated. You don't feel grief, you feel stressed. The vocabulary of feeling erodes until only numbness remains. This is what Jung meant when he said modern people suffer from the loss of meaning. Meaning isn't found in comfort. It's found in contact. Contact with your real, unfiltered emotional life. When you deny that contact, you become a stranger to yourself. You can recite mantras, meditate for hours, keep your vision board perfectly curated. But if you can't cry, you're not free. The real spiritual act is not staying positive. It's staying present, even when what you feel is unbearable. To feel sadness fully without collapsing into despair. To feel rage without turning it into hate. To feel grief without rushing to fix it. That's what Jung called the noble suffering. The pain that heals because it's allowed to exist. When you finally stop running from what hurts, something miraculous happens. The emotion that once terrified you begins to transform. Grief turns into compassion. Anger turns into clarity. Fear turns into faith. Because emotion, when faced directly, isn't an enemy. It's energy returning home. Positivity is not bravery. Feeling is. The light that never touches darkness is artificial. Jung would remind you, the soul doesn't heal by pretending to be fine. It heals the moment you allow yourself to fall apart. And trust that you won't disappear when you do. On the surface, happiness seems harmless, the sign of a healthy, evolved person. But Jung would say otherwise. When happiness becomes an identity, it creates its own prison. Because light, when forced, casts the darkest shadow. The more you try to be the happy one, the more your unhappiness grows in secret, denied, unspoken, swelling in the corners of your soul. We all know someone like this, the person who's always cheerful, endlessly encouraging, radiating optimism like it's oxygen. They say things like, everything happens for a reason. Just focus on the blessings. I don't do negativity. They mean well, but watch closely. Their smile never quite reaches their eyes. Jung would call this a persona inflated with light. It's not a personality, it's protection, because somewhere in their past they learned that sadness made people uncomfortable, that pain made them unlovable. So they became the sun, not because they wanted to, but because they were afraid of being seen in the dark. The happy one is not free. They're exhausted. Jung taught that the psyche demands balance. Whatever you push out of consciousness doesn't disappear. It gathers strength in the unconscious. So when you repress pain in the name of happiness, you create its shadow, bitterness, envy, hidden rage. You can hear it in people who use positivity like a weapon. Don't bring your negative energy around me. You're being dramatic. Think positive. They sound kind, but there's aggression beneath their tone. The aggression of someone who's spent their entire life holding the floodgates shut. Jung warned, the brighter the persona, the darker the shadow. Every smile you fake adds another layer to the mask, and another secret to the darkness beneath it. This shadow isn't just personal, it's collective. We live in a world that treats unhappiness as contagion. Employers reward enthusiasm over honesty. Influencers profit off good energy. Even therapists, under pressure to empower, sometimes turns sorrow into a problem to fix instead of a truth to honor. The result? A culture addicted to emotional anesthesia. We call it productivity. We call it success. But really, it's dissociation, an entire society terrified of its own sadness. And in that denial, our shadow grows massive. Depression rates rise, not because we feel too much, but because we've forgotten how to feel at all. People who live through this false light often describe a strange kind of pain, not sharp, but hollow. They'll say things like, "I don't know why I feel empty," or "I have everything I wanted, but something's missing." That missing thing is authenticity. You can't experience real joy when half your psyche is locked away, because joy and sorrow are twins. You can't kill one without wounding the other. Every time you numb grief, you also numb wonder. Every time you deny anger, you also silence passion. Every time you run from fear, you also lose awe. The cost of constant positivity is depth. Eventually, the shadow fights back. It slips through in sarcasm, irritation, quiet resentment toward the very people you're trying to uplift. You start to feel contempt for those who can't be positive, not because you're better, but because their pain reminds you of your own. Jung said the things we judge most harshly in others are the things we've repressed in ourselves. The negative people you avoid are often carrying the parts of you you've refused to meet. The shadow's message is clear. What you reject in them is what you've buried in you. When the happy one finally breaks, when the tears come, when the smile slips, when the truth spills out, it feels like failure. But Jung would call it liberation, because only when the false light collapses can the real one appear. The happiness that's born from denial is brittle. The happiness that's born from honesty is unbreakable. And that's the paradox. You can't reach genuine joy until you've walked through sorrow. The shadow of happiness is not sadness, it's denial. Jung would remind you, the goal is not to be happy all the time, it's to be real all the time, because happiness without truth is performance. But sorrow faced fully becomes light. It doesn't happen suddenly. The collapse begins quietly. A small crack in the mask. You forget to smile at work. You skip the affirmation one morning. You don't feel like pretending, but you do it anyway, out of habit. Then one day, the mask just doesn't fit anymore. And that's when the light turns heavy. At first, it feels like exhaustion. You're tired all the time, but you can't rest. You avoid people who expect you to be the positive one. You start to resent the quotes you used to share. You wonder, what's wrong with me? I used to be so strong. But Jung would say nothing's wrong. Something's waking up. Because you can only suppress the dark for so long before it forces its way through the cracks. The psyche has a law. What you reject will return. And when it returns, it doesn't knock. It floods. The breakdown people fear, the panic attacks, the depression, the sudden sense of emptiness, are not failures of positivity. They're the soul's rebellion against it. Jung called this enantiodromia, the natural reversal of an extreme. When you cling too hard to one side of the spectrum, the opposite erupts to restore balance. The more you chase light, the more violently the dark will demand to be seen. So the person who spent years radiating good vibes suddenly feels swallowed by despair. The optimist becomes cynical. The motivator can't get out of bed. But beneath the collapse, there's something sacred happening. The self is shedding its mask. Jung described this as the night sea journey, the descent into the unconscious that every soul must eventually make. It's not a breakdown, it's a breaking open. You lose your certainty, your identity, your carefully built persona. The affirmations stop working. The light you worshipped feels far away. And in that darkness, you meet what you've avoided your entire life. Grief, loneliness, the raw truth that positivity never healed your pain, it only postponed it. This is what mystics call the dark night of the soul, not punishment but purification, because light that's never passed through darkness isn't light, it's illusion. During this collapse, something dies, the happy one, the healer, the uplifting spirit. All the roles you built to stay loved begin to dissolve. It feels like you're losing yourself, but you're losing the wrong self, the one who smiled to survive, the one who never cried because someone had to stay strong, the one who thought being positive meant being worthy. What's actually dying is the performance, and the grief that follows isn't weakness. It's mourning for the years you weren't allowed to be real. After the mask falls, there's a silence that feels endless. The space between who you were and who you're becoming. You don't know what to say anymore. You don't know who to be around. The conversations that once felt natural, light, surface level, everything's fine, suddenly feel empty. You crave depth, but depth scares people. So you walk alone for a while. But in that solitude, something gentle begins to grow, an honesty that feels like oxygen. You begin to speak more slowly, more truthfully. You stop trying to fix the silence. You start letting it teach you. That's the moment Jung said the soul begins to reorient, from persona to authenticity, from perfection to wholeness. Eventually, a new kind of brightness emerges, softer, quieter, less blinding. It doesn't deny pain, it includes it. It doesn't avoid darkness, it integrates it. This light isn't the result of control, but surrender. It's the light that survives the dark. You laugh again, not to convince yourself you're fine, but because something inside finally is. You feel sadness, not as defeat, but as depth. You live, not as a performance, but as participation. This is what Jung called the illumination that follows descent. The collapse of constant light is not the end. It's the beginning of truth. When your false brightness dies, your soul begins to glow from a different place, not from fear of the dark, but from friendship with it. Jung would remind you, the goal of life is not to stay in the light, but to make peace with the dark, because only then can your light become real. On the surface, suffering looks like failure, proof that something has gone wrong. You lose a job, a relationship, your sense of control, and you think, I must have done something to attract this. That's what modern spirituality tells you. Your pain is a problem to solve, not an experience to feel. But Jung would say otherwise. He believed suffering is not the opposite of healing. It's the doorway to it. Jung once wrote, neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. In other words, when you refuse to face your pain consciously, the psyche finds other ways to make you feel it. You won't allow yourself to grieve, so you become anxious. You won't allow yourself to rage, so you become numb. You won't allow yourself to feel lost, so you overachieve. We don't avoid suffering. We just trade it for a quieter, more chronic kind. The ache of avoidance is always worse than the pain of honesty. To Jung, pain was never meaningless. It was teleological. It pointed somewhere. Every depression, every crisis, every heartbreak was the psyche's way of forcing consciousness to grow. When you suffer, something within you is trying to transform. The old self, the one that lived for image, control, or false light, is burning. Jung compared this to alchemy. The alchemists sought to turn base metals into gold, but what they were really describing was inner transformation. The fire that destroys is the same fire that refines. Your pain isn't punishment, it's purification. Most people never let pain do its work because they're terrified of what it might change. You think, if I let myself feel this, it'll consume me. But what really happens is the opposite. The moment you stop running, pain starts revealing. You begin to see what you've built your life on, the roles, the masks, the constant pursuit of good vibes that kept you safe but small. Suffering strips you bare. It takes away your illusions, your slogans, your spiritual shortcuts, until only truth remains. That's why Jung called suffering the crucible of individuation, because to become whole, the false self must die. In ancient alchemy, there was a stage called nigredo, the blackening. Everything impure was burned away in darkness before transformation could begin. Jung saw this same process in the psyche. Every dark night, every breakdown, every confrontation with despair is the nigredo of the soul. You descend, thinking you're dying, but really, you're dissolving the structures that no longer serve your truth. You're not being destroyed, you're being reformed. The light that comes after nigredo is not the old brightness of good vibes. It's something quieter, an inner luminosity that no darkness can threaten. Suffering becomes bearable the moment it gains meaning. When you see your pain as random, it feels like cruelty. But when you see it as communication, it becomes sacred. You realize that heartbreak wasn't just loss. It was the soul's way of breaking the shell that kept you from loving deeper. That depression wasn't just emptiness. It was your psyche withdrawing energy from a life that no longer nourished it. That failure wasn't punishment. It was redirection. Pain becomes holy when you stop trying to fix it and start asking it what it's teaching you. When you finally let yourself suffer consciously, you stop living at the surface. You begin to experience life in full color again. Not just its highs, but its lows, its quiet, its in-betweens. You feel the world breathing through you, not as something to manage, but as something to meet. Suffering makes you real. It strips away performance and reveals presence. And once you've suffered honestly, you become incapable of judging others for their darkness. You see pain as something universal, a shared language of the soul. That's how compassion is born. Not from avoiding suffering, but from surviving it. Avoided pain becomes poison. Faced pain becomes power. Jung would remind you, the soul does not grow through pleasure. It grows through friction, through fire, through the honesty of heartbreak. Because true light isn't found by escaping suffering. It's found by allowing it to burn away everything that isn't you. After the collapse, after the false light burns away, there's a moment of disorientation. You no longer know who you are without your smile. You no longer trust the slogans that once guided you. You're left standing in the ashes of your own positivity, wondering what's left. Jung would say, what's left is truth. And now, the work begins. Not to rebuild the mask, but to meet the self that never needed one. Step 1. Withdraw. Projection. The first step is to stop labeling parts of life as positive or negative. When you call sadness bad, you exile it. When you call anger low vibration, you bury your boundaries. When you call fear weakness, you cut off your instinct. Jung called this moral splitting. The illusion that you can separate good from evil inside the human soul. But the psyche doesn't operate in absolutes. Everything belongs. When you stop projecting darkness onto emotions or people, you realize it was never out there. It was always in you, waiting to be recognized. This is the first act of freedom, reclaiming what you disowned. Step 2. Embrace paradox. Jung taught that wholeness comes from holding the tension of opposites. You don't need to choose between happiness and sorrow, faith and doubt, light and dark. You need to let them coexist. This is not confusion. It's consciousness. It's the realization that you can cry and still be strong. You can feel lost and still be guided. You can doubt and still have faith. The psyche matures when it can contain contradiction without collapse. When you stop forcing yourself to stay positive, you allow the full range of your humanity to breathe. And that's when meaning, not comfort, begins to grow. Step 3. Integrate the shadow. Now comes the hardest part, facing the repressed self directly. The anger you denied, the jealousy you spiritualized, the loneliness you disguised as independence. They're not your enemies, they're exiled energies, and each one carries something you need to be whole. Jung called this shadow integration. It's the process of taking back what you've projected, what you've shamed, what you've refused to feel. It doesn't mean indulging your darkness, it means owning it. Saying, yes, I am capable of anger. Yes, I crave control. Yes, I have envy. Once you acknowledge these parts without judgment, they lose their grip. Step 4. Redefine light. Most people think integration means losing light. But Jung would argue the opposite. The moment you face your shadow, your light becomes real for the first time. The false light of good vibes was performative. It needed an audience. But true light doesn't shine at people. It radiates through you. It's calm, not performative, grounded, not manic, compassionate, not corrective. It doesn't say, everything's fine. It says, everything's human. That's the difference between a mask and a presence. Step 5. Live the middle path. Jung believed that once the shadow is integrated, life becomes simple again. Not easier, but honest. You stop chasing highs and fearing lows. You start living in rhythm, expanding, contracting, rising, falling. You stop seeing healing as becoming perfect. You start seeing it as becoming real. You laugh, you cry, you lose, you love, and through it all, you remain centered. This is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming a whole, undivided being. The self, not the ego, not the mask, becomes the guiding force. Step 6. Serve from wholeness. When you reach this state, you no longer preach light. You embody it. You don't tell people to think positive. You sit with them in their pain, unafraid of it. You don't offer advice. You offer presence. You don't uplift to avoid darkness. You uplift because you've made peace with it. You become what Jung called a wounded healer, someone whose compassion doesn't come from avoiding suffering, but from walking through it. The world doesn't need more light workers who fear the dark. It needs whole humans who have learned to live with it. The way out of the prison of positivity isn't more light. It's truth. Jung would remind you, the goal of life is not to be endlessly happy, but endlessly real. You don't escape darkness by denying it. You transcend it by embracing it, until your soul becomes what it was always meant to be, not light without shadow, but light through shadow. On the surface, you might think healing means finally being happy, finally finding peace, purpose, positivity. But Jung would say otherwise. Healing doesn't make you happy. It makes you whole. And wholeness, unlike happiness, includes everything. The joy and the grief, the laughter and the longing, the beauty and the mess. Because to be whole is not to rise above your humanity. It's to return to it. Once you integrate the shadow, you begin to lose your addiction to emotional highs. You no longer need every day to feel good. You no longer need life to validate your worth. You realize that happiness, as we've been taught to chase it, is just another drug, a socially acceptable way to escape the present moment. The constant craving for more light was never joy. It was fear in disguise. Fear of emptiness, fear of silence, fear of being ordinary. But now the craving fades. The silence doesn't scare you anymore. The ordinary feels sacred. You no longer chase the peak. You learn to live in the valley. Wholeness feels nothing like the manic euphoria of constant positivity. It feels like calm, like breathing without performing. You stop trying to manifest peace because you realize you were never separate from it. Peace isn't a prize you earn through perfection. It's what remains when you stop running from yourself. Jung called this the union of opposites, the moment when all the parts of you finally sit at the same table. The wounded self, the joyful self, the jealous, tired, hopeful, and furious selves. All of them are welcome. All of them belong. That's what true healing sounds like. Not, I'm fine, but I'm everything. When you stop chasing happiness, something deeper takes its place. Meaning. Meaning isn't glamorous. It's quiet. It's the kind of fulfillment that comes from knowing that even your suffering has purpose. You begin to see patterns, not of punishment, but of evolution. Every heartbreak forged empathy. Every loss deepened wisdom. Every descent gave your soul more texture. This is what Jung meant when he said, "The sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of being." Not to erase the darkness, but to illuminate it from within. After integration, you look at the world differently. You see joy and sorrow walking hand in hand everywhere. The laughter at funerals, the beauty in decay, the softness inside rage. You stop labeling moments as good or bad. You start asking, what are they showing me? You no longer resist life's seasons. You move with them. You allow endings. You honor beginnings. You live inside the flow. Even pain stops feeling like punishment. It feels like participation, like being part of something vast, intelligent, and alive. When you no longer reject any part of yourself, you stop rejecting life itself. You don't need to escape anymore. You don't need to stay positive. You can stand in the middle of a storm and feel your own stillness. That's the paradox of wholeness. The moment you stop demanding life to be good, it becomes beautiful. Because beauty was never in perfection. It was in presence. And when individuals integrate, the world begins to change. Imagine if everyone stopped pretending to be fine. If everyone allowed their shadow to speak. There would be less judgment, less posturing, less spiritual ego. Because when you faced your own darkness, you lose the need to fear anyone else's. Jung believed that personal integration was the only hope for collective healing. Because the wars outside us are born from the wars within us. When one person stops denying their darkness, a ripple moves through the world, a small piece of light made real by shadow. So when life stops feeling high vibe, don't rush to fix it. Sit inside it. Feel it. Because what you call darkness might not be failure. It might be your soul calling you home. If this stirred something inside you, subscribe to FactSpire TV. Not for positive thinking, not for surface comfort, but for the kind of truth that doesn't sugarcoat, the kind that teaches you how to live whole.